I moved to Brazil 8 months ago after a long breakup and a burnout that left me unable to sleep for more than 3 hours a night. A friend who lived in Curitiba told me about a job opening at a 24-hour pharmacy downtown. It didn't pay much, but it was quiet, and they needed someone to cover the night shift. That sounded perfect to me. The first few weeks were uneventful. Most of my clients came in before midnight, people looking for cold medicine, allergy tablets, or painkillers. After that, the store usually stayed empty, just the occasional delivery truck rumbling past or someone walking their dog under the yellow streetlights. It felt safe, in that strangely comforting way that cities can feel when they're asleep. Then came the night I saw him for the first time. It was 1:42 a.m. and I remember that specific time because I had just made a cup of chamomile tea and was logging the inventory. The door opened without much sound, and a man stepped inside. Tall, pale, and completely dry, even though it had been raining for hours. He wasn't holding an umbrella, and there was no water on his clothes or shoes. He didn't go to the shelves, he didn't even look around, he just stood there, a few steps past the entrance, scanning the space like he was trying to remember why he had come in. For a second, I thought maybe he was confused, or high, or even lost. I greeted him in Portuguese, but he didn't answer. I tried English, and he finally took a slow step forward. He reached the counter, leaned in slightly, and said he needed something to help him sleep. His voice was low, uncomfortably low, like he was afraid of being heard. I asked if he had a prescription. He didn't respond. He just tilted his head to the side and smiled, like the question didn't apply to him. It wasn't an aggressive smile, and it wasn't friendly either. There was no warmth behind it. It looked like someone trying to imitate a human expression without quite understanding what it meant. I offered him a melatonin supplement we were allowed to sell over the counter. He didn't move, but his eyes followed me as I turned to grab the box from the shelf behind me. I handed it to him, but he didn't take it. Instead, he blinked slowly, then turned around and walked out without a word. The door didn't make a sound when it opened, or when it closed. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure if I had just imagined the whole thing. The box of melatonin was still in my hand. I stepped around the counter and looked out the glass, but the sidewalk was empty. The street was wet and silent. When I reviewed the camera footage later that morning, I found something strange. The feed had a glitch. Just a few seconds of static between 1:42 and 1:45. And when it returned, the man was gone. The door didn't register opening again. 2 nights later, at exactly the same time, the door opened again. I was behind the counter, updating the stock system. The rain had stopped that day, but the air outside still looked thick and damp through the glass. When I looked up, it was him. Same height, same pale face, same dry brown jacket. This time, he didn't even hesitate. He walked in like he knew the place. I kept my posture relaxed and tried to look occupied, but I could feel my stomach tightening. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He drifted between the aisles slowly, tracing his fingers along the shelves without picking anything up. Not browsing, just moving. He stopped by the cold medicine section. For a long moment he stood perfectly still, staring at the labels without focusing on any of them. Then he walked toward the refrigerators at the back and placed both hands on the glass doors, resting them there like he was trying to feel the cold. I asked him, carefully, if he needed help finding something. He didn't answer. He just smiled again. But this time the smile felt different. It came faster, smoother, more controlled, like he had practiced it. I didn't see any emotion behind it, just the performance of politeness. He didn't take anything from the shelf. He didn't ask about the melatonin again. After a few minutes, he turned and walked out, the same way he had the first time. Not a single word exchanged, not a single item touched, just silence. I checked the cameras the moment he left. Same glitch, 3 seconds of static right before he disappeared from frame. No image of him leaving, no door movement, just gone. The next morning, I showed the footage to my manager. He said it was probably a buffering issue. "The system's old," he muttered, waving it off like it was nothing. "Could be the Wi-Fi or the rain, happens all the time." But it hadn't happened before. Not like that. Later that day, I asked the tech guy from the head office to check the system. I didn't tell him the details, just said there was a small issue with the overnight footage. He opened the logs and frowned. "There's no interruption on the system side," he said. "It didn't record because the camera thought nothing happened." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask. That night, I sat behind the counter with my phone recording. I kept the lights on full brightness and the audio turned up on the CCTV. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that it wouldn't happen again. But I knew what time to watch for. 1:42 a.m. At exactly 1:42 a.m., the door opened. This time, he wasn't alone. He stepped in first, same jacket, same stillness, but then, holding the door open behind him, came someone else. Shorter, wearing a long dark coat with the hood pulled over their face. I couldn't make out anything about them. No skin, no hair, not even a clear shape, just the suggestion of a presence. They didn't enter together. The tall man walked to the middle of the store and started his slow loop between the aisles, just like before. The hooded one remained near the entrance, standing so still it felt like part of the furniture. But I could feel them watching me. Neither of them said a word. I stayed seated behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts while my phone recorded beside me. I didn't want to look like I was panicking, but my chest felt tight and my hands were starting to sweat. The man stopped near the pain relief section. He turned toward the register, stared for a few seconds, then reached into his jacket pocket. He walked over and placed something on the counter. A folded piece of paper, yellowed, like it had been in his pocket for days. Without a word, he turned and walked away. The hooded figure followed, their footsteps softer than the low buzz of the refrigerator behind me. The door opened and closed, then silence. I waited a full minute before touching the paper. I unfolded it slowly, expecting to find a phone number or maybe a prescription request. But there was only a single line, written in shaky Portuguese. "Você foi escolhido, não feche dormir." "You've been chosen. Don't close tonight." I stared at the handwriting. It was uneven, like someone had written it on a moving bus or with trembling hands. The letters slanted up, like the words had been whispered instead of written. I felt the urge to throw it away, to pretend it had never been handed to me. Instead, I slipped it under the drawer and called the night supervisor. I told him there were 2 suspicious people in the store and that I wasn't feeling safe. He asked if they were still there. I said no, but something about them felt off. He told me to keep the doors locked for the rest of the shift. He'd send someone to review the footage in the morning. I hung up the phone and sat down again, listening to the sounds of the pharmacy. The low hum of the lights, the soft flick of the air conditioner, the clicking of the clock on the wall. But outside, nothing. No cars, no footsteps, not even rain. The hours passed slowly after that. I kept the door locked, lights on, and my phone recording just in case. Every few minutes, I'd glance toward the front window, expecting to see one of them standing there. But the street outside remained still. Not empty exactly, just paused. Like the city had gone silent without warning. At 2:37 a.m., the fluorescent lights flickered. Just once. It wasn't unusual. The building was old and we had problems with power now and then, but this time I felt it before I saw it. Something in the air shifted, like the room had swallowed sound. My breathing sounded louder than it should have. And then, without warning, the power went out. Total darkness, except for the red standby light on the card reader and the small emergency LED above the door. I stayed frozen behind the counter, heart racing. The humming had stopped. Even the air conditioning had gone silent. Then I heard the front door creak. Not the beep of the sensor, not the chime, just the soft, wooden sound of the glass shifting in its frame, as if someone was slowly opening it with their hand. But no one came in. For 30, maybe 40 seconds, nothing moved. I couldn't hear footsteps. I couldn't see a shadow. Just the quiet buzz of the emergency light pulsing against the floor tiles. When the lights came back on, everything looked exactly the same. Except for one thing. The back door to the supply room, locked every night, always checked twice, was open. Not wide, but just enough to show the gap between door and frame. A cold draft crept out of it, carrying a smell I hadn't noticed before. Like something chemical, or burned. I walked toward it slowly, stopping at the threshold. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. From where I stood, I could see that one of the cardboard boxes had been pulled apart, its contents scattered on the floor. Bandages, gauze, latex gloves, and on the counter inside, something new. The piece of paper from earlier. Unfolded, placed neatly in the center of the table. I hadn't taken it out from the drawer. I hadn't touched it since I first hid it. I didn't go to work the next night. I called in sick, said I'd caught something from the cold and needed a few days to recover. My manager didn't ask questions. He probably assumed it was just another burnout. I stayed in my apartment with the curtains closed and the lights on through the night. I didn't sleep. But even there, something felt wrong, like the silence was following me. 2 days later, I checked the pharmacy cameras remotely from my phone. I still had the access code. I told myself it was just to confirm everything was normal, that the camera glitches were gone, that the strange man hadn't returned. But he had. At exactly 1:42 a.m., he walked in. Alone this time. No hooded figure, no bag, no words. He stepped inside and stood in the center of the store, just staring at the counter, at the exact spot where I usually sat. He didn't move, didn't touch anything. He stayed there for nearly 4 minutes. Then he tilted his head slightly and smiled. But this time it was different. His eyes weren't fixed on the register. They were looking directly into the camera. I paused the footage, watched it again and again. That wasn't a random glance. He knew where the lens was, and he knew I was watching. The following night, my replacement called me. He sounded shaken, voice low, almost whispering. He asked if I'd ever seen a man in a brown jacket hanging around the store. I didn't know what to say. I asked him what happened. He said the guy walked in and never said a word, just stood near the fridge for 15 minutes without moving. Then he placed something on the floor before leaving. When my coworker checked later, it was a photo, printed, fake, of the back room, taken from inside. On the table in the photo, he saw something small and white, a piece of paper, folded. He turned the photo over. There was no writing, but in the bottom corner, just barely visible, were the last 2 digits of a timestamp, 42.
When I first moved to Brazil, I didn't know what I was doing. I had accepted a job offer on impulse, one of those remote positions that let you live anywhere with a stable internet connection. I'd never been to South America before, but the opportunity to get away from my life in London, away from the breakup, the stress, the noise, felt like a lifeline I didn't want to question. A friend of a friend helped me sublet a studio apartment in Belo Horizonte. The place was small but clean, tucked behind a larger residential building in a quiet part of the city. 1 room, a kitchenette, and a single window that looked out over a narrow alley. I remember noticing how still the alley was. No cars, no dumpsters, just a high concrete wall, an old metal gate, and a tangle of power lines overhead. It felt peaceful in a strange way. But by the second week, I started seeing the woman. At first, it didn't register. I'd be washing dishes or making coffee and notice a figure standing by the alley gate. She wore a long skirt and a cardigan, her hair pulled back into a bun. From my angle, I could only see her from the shoulders down. She never moved, just stood there, facing the wall, close enough that I could hear her bracelets when the wind rattled them. I assumed she was waiting for someone, a neighbor, a delivery, something ordinary. But she came back. Every day. Same spot, same posture. Morning, afternoon, even late at night. Sometimes she stayed for hours, sometimes just minutes, but always still, always silent, and she never once tried to enter the building. I found that detail strange. If she was visiting someone, why hadn't anyone come out to meet her? One afternoon, I asked the doorman if he knew her. He gave a tired shrug and said, "Ella fica aies voce, achoque moral perto." She just hangs around, probably lives nearby. I let it go. I didn't want to be the paranoid foreigner. But the next morning, I woke up to find her standing even closer to my window, almost directly below it. She wasn't looking and just standing near the base of the wall with her arms folded. I remember the sun hadn't fully risen yet and the light was blue-gray. It cast her shadow in a way that made it stretch long and strange across the alley. I closed the curtain. I tried not to think about it. I had meetings, work to finish, calls to make, but I couldn't focus. Every time I paused, I found myself listening, trying to hear if she was still out there. And once, when the wind shifted, I swore I heard her breathing, slow and steady, like she was waiting for something to happen. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about the way she stood so close to the building, not doing anything, not even looking up, just being there. I tried to tell myself it was harmless. Some people have routines that don't make sense to outsiders. Maybe the alley was the only quiet place she had. Maybe she liked being near the wall. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft scrape, like metal dragging lightly across cement. I sat up slowly, unsure whether it had come from inside the building or outside. Then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate noise, not accidental, not repetitive, like something being moved with intention. I got out of bed and walked to the window. She was there, but she wasn't standing this time. She was kneeling by the wall, one hand pressed against the bricks, the other holding something small and silver. I couldn't make out what it was, but it caught the light every time she moved it. She was tracing the metal along the base of the wall, back and forth. I didn't open the curtain all the way, just watched through a narrow gap, heart racing. She stayed like that for nearly 5 minutes, then stood, brushed off her skirt, and walked down the alley, disappearing behind the gate without a glance back. The next morning, I walked outside to check. There was nothing obvious on the wall, no marks, no scratches, but something felt different about the bricks near the ground, like the surface had been rubbed or scuffed. I told myself to forget it, that I was inventing meaning where there was none, but the next night I slept with the lights on. Around midnight, I heard footsteps near the gate. They didn't stop. They didn't get closer, just slow, steady pacing in the narrow alley. I sat in bed, holding my breath. Then came the scraping again, fainter this time, not as sharp, but still there. I didn't look out the window. I just lay there in the glow of the lamp, waiting for the sound to stop. It did eventually, but not before it had shifted position. Closer, like it was moving up the wall. And that time, I didn't hear her walk away. The next day, I barely left the apartment. I kept glancing at the alley from the corner of my eye, half expecting to see her standing there again, but the space remained empty, quiet in that way that doesn't feel peaceful anymore. I opened the window once to let in some air, but I didn't look down. I couldn't. By the afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't even the same woman every time. Maybe I had attached meaning to something ordinary because I was alone, overstimulated, too far from home. But then I saw the bag. It was a small plastic grocery bag, tied shut, resting just inside the metal fence that bordered the alley. I noticed it around 6 p.m. when the sun was low and the light caught the white plastic in a way that made it stand out against the concrete. At first I thought someone had just tossed their trash there, but the bag was clean, neatly placed, centered between two bricks. I waited until it was dark to go check. I don't know why. Something about the timing felt safer. I took the long way around, exiting through the main gate and looping behind the building. The alley was empty. I crouched beside the bag. It wasn't heavy. I untied the knot carefully, trying to ignore the pit growing in my stomach. Inside, folded neatly, was a single sock. It was mine. Light gray with a pale blue stripe near the top. A brand I'd bought before moving. Washed, folded, clean. I took it inside and checked the laundry rack. The matching one was still there. I didn't tell anyone, not Anna, not my supervisor. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. I threw the sock away, locked all the windows, and sat on the couch with my computer open but my mind somewhere else entirely. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the building felt magnified. Every gust of wind against the glass made me flinch. Around 3 a.m., I got up and turned on all the lights. There was nothing outside the window, but I didn't dare open the curtain more than a sliver. In the morning, I found nothing in the alley. No bag, no footprints, no sign she had ever been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had entered. Not the apartment exactly, but the space around it. It happened 3 nights later. I came home after a long day of meetings, dropped my bag on the table, and went straight to the bathroom. I didn't check the alley. I didn't open the curtain. I didn't want to know. I had tried so hard to return to a sense of normalcy, cooking, cleaning, pretending this apartment was just a temporary space and not something that was slowly closing in around me. But when I walked into my bedroom, I stopped cold. There was another bag. This one wasn't outside. It was sitting on the bed, perfectly placed in the center of the blanket. Same kind of plastic, same neat knot, but this time slightly heavier. I didn't move for several seconds, just stood there, staring at it, like it might do something. Eventually, I forced myself forward and untied it. Inside were strands of my hair, long, dark brown, mine without question. Mixed in with them was a folded tissue, and beneath that, a second sock. The matching one, the one I'd thrown away days earlier. I backed out of the room like it was on fire, locked the door behind me, sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the fridge, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I didn't know who. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding insane. Nothing had been broken. The locks were untouched, but the bag had been left, and it had come from inside the apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake, lights on, kitchen knife in hand, waiting for morning. I don't remember hearing any sounds, no creaks, no clicks, just the low hum of the fridge and the unbearable weight of being watched by something I couldn't see. At 7 a.m., I packed a bag and left. I checked into a hostel downtown, sharing a room with 2 German girls I barely spoke to. It didn't matter. I just needed walls, people, movement. Anything that didn't feel like that alley, like that window, like that bag sitting quietly on my bed. I returned to the apartment the next afternoon only to grab a few more things. I didn't stay longer than 10 minutes, but just before I left, I found something new. Sitting by the door, on the inside this time, pressed against the baseboard, was a third bag. I never moved back into that apartment. I tried. I went there once more with a friend I met at the co-working space, told her I'd left some things behind, tried to sound casual. She waited in the hallway while I packed in silence. I didn't tell her about the bags, about the hair, about the marks on the wall that had appeared overnight, thin and curved, like something had been drawn with metal just beneath the paint. The studio felt different now. Not abandoned, not haunted, just occupied in a way I couldn't name. Before we left, I glanced out the window one last time. She was there, standing by the fence again, exactly where she had always been. But something had changed. She was no longer facing the alley or the wall. This time, she was facing the building, facing me. I didn't move. I didn't wave, just lowered the curtain. That night, I stayed at a friend's place in another part of the city. Taller buildings, no alleys, no ground-level windows. I kept my phone on silent and my laptop closed. I didn't want to know what was happening back there. I wanted to believe it was over, but something about the stillness followed me. I started waking up at 2:13 a.m. without reason, no noise, no dreams, just a cold, quiet alertness, like I had been listening for something in my sleep. And then, one morning, I found something on the balcony, a plastic bag, neatly tied, sitting just outside the glass door. I left it there, didn't open it, didn't touch it, just backed away slowly and pulled the curtain shut. I moved again the next week. No forwarding address, no goodbye. I don't know what she wanted. I don't know if she was even real, but some nights, in the pause between sleep and waking, I swear I can hear it. The sound of metal sliding gently across concrete, slow, deliberate, and sometimes, when the wind shifts, I think I can hear her breathing, not close, but not far either.
I got the night shift because no one else wanted it. A private security company had just signed a new contract to cover an old commercial building in the center of São Paulo. The place had 9 floors, a small lobby, and dozens of empty offices that hadn't been used since the pandemic. My job was simple: monitor the cameras from the control room and do one full round of the building between midnight and 1 a.m. It was my first job in Brazil. I had arrived from Lagos 4 months earlier with little money and no Portuguese. My cousin helped me get settled and passed along my resume to a friend. When they offered me the night shift, I accepted right away. I thought the silence would be easy. But the silence in that building wasn't the peaceful kind. The first few nights passed without incident. Most of the office lights stayed off. The few that didn't were stuck that way, flickering or humming faintly through the early hours. The elevators worked, but no one used them after 7 p.m. The stairwells smelled like damp concrete and cleaning chemicals. By the 4th night, I knew the routine. I walked the same path, checked the same doors, noted the same sounds, until the elevator stopped on its own. It was 12:08 a.m. I had just stepped onto the 5th floor to finish the last half of my patrol when I heard the chime, soft, metallic, unmistakable. The elevator doors had opened behind me. I turned around, expecting to see someone from maintenance. The cabin was empty. No lights in sight. No button pressed. Just open. I stepped closer and looked at the panel. The screen still showed the ground floor. No request had been made. No floor had been selected. I returned to the control room and replayed the camera feed. But the system didn't show the elevator moving. It jumped from idle to open in one frame. No transition, no travel. At first I thought it was a glitch. I made a note of it in the logbook and continued my shift. But I felt something in the pit of my stomach, something small and tense, like the beginning of a thought I didn't want to finish. The next night I paid closer attention. I sat in the control room with the elevator feed open on the main screen. The building was quiet, just as before. Lights flickering on the 4th floor, distant pipes ticking somewhere in the walls. I watched the panel like I was waiting for it to confess something. At exactly 12:08 a.m., it happened again. The elevator, idle since 8 p.m., opened its doors on the 5th floor. No one inside. No call request. Same glitch on the feed, idle, then open. No in between. But this time, something was different. Inside the cabin, placed in the back corner, was a plastic chair. One of the break room chairs from the 2nd floor. I recognized it immediately, the blue seat with a hairline crack in the middle. I went downstairs during my patrol and checked. All the other chairs were still there, except one. I didn't know what to do with the one in the elevator. I didn't want to touch it, so I just waited. At 12:26 a.m., the doors closed on their own. The chair was gone. I reviewed the footage in the morning. Same story. The elevator feed showed the doors open, then closed. The chair appeared and disappeared between frames. On my 6th night, it changed again. The elevator opened at 12:08, but not on the 5th floor. This time it stopped on the 6th. That floor had been under renovation since before I started. No active offices, just old desks stacked in the corners and plastic sheets covering the windows. The hallway lights barely worked. The camera feed had a grainy green tint. I went up with my flashlight and approached slowly. The elevator doors were still open. Inside, nothing. But on the floor just outside the cabin, I saw footprints. Dusty outlines as if someone had stepped through powder and walked out. They led halfway down the hallway and stopped in front of an empty office. The door was open. I didn't go in. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, listening. There was no sound, no wind, no breathing, but I could feel it. Something had been in there, and it had come up in that elevator. That morning, I filed another report. I wrote everything down: what time the elevator opened, what I found on the 6th floor, how the system showed no request being made. I even mentioned the footprints, though I avoided using the word human. I didn't know if that was what I'd seen. My supervisor didn't comment. He just nodded and said, "The system's old, might be a sensor issue." He didn't check the footage. By the 7th night, I had stopped thinking like a guard. I didn't care about the doors or the cameras or the motion detectors. I only cared about one thing: what the elevator would do next. I started my shift tense, ears tuned to that metallic chime, fingers hovering over the keyboard. At 12:08 a.m., the sound came. This time, the elevator opened on the 4th floor. That made no sense. The 4th floor had no power. The lights were dead. The motion sensors didn't register anything. I switched to the backup monitor and watched as the doors slid open into total darkness. I climbed the stairs with my flashlight. Every step echoed louder than it should have. When I reached the hallway, the elevator was still open. I stepped inside. It was cold, colder than the rest of the building, and on the back wall, drawn in thick, dark charcoal, was an image. A door. Not the elevator door, not one from the building. This one was old, wooden, with a black frame and a handle that pointed downward, like it had been used recently. Above the door, written in uneven strokes, was a single word. A box. Down below. I didn't touch it. I didn't clean it. I just stepped out and backed away slowly. When I returned to the control room, I checked the camera for the 4th floor hallway. It had gone dark at 12:06 a.m. and stayed that way until 12:20. The elevator didn't even register as open. Later that morning, when the day's staff arrived, I asked the janitor if he could clean the elevator walls. I said someone had drawn something during the night. He went up during daylight and returned 10 minutes later holding his mop. There was nothing there, he said. By the 8th night, I stopped doing my patrol. I stayed in the control room with all the cameras open, notebook in hand, timing the events down to the second. I left the elevator feed on the big monitor, watching for the flicker that always came before it opened. I didn't want to chase it anymore, I just wanted to understand it. At 12:08 a.m., nothing happened. 12:09, 12:10, still nothing. I started to wonder if it was over. Maybe someone had fixed something during the day. Maybe I'd spent the last week chasing a glitch, building a story around routine malfunctions. My hands relaxed. I leaned back in the chair. Then, at 12:13, the screen glitched. It didn't go black, it froze, like the elevator was caught between frames. When it returned, the screen showed something I'd never seen before. The panel inside the elevator read, 1. There was no 1. The building had no basement. No sublevel, no access, not even on the blueprints. I stared at the number, waiting for it to change. But it didn't. The elevator stayed there for almost a minute, motionless. Then the feed cut to static again. When it returned, the elevator was back on the 5th floor. Empty. I ran the footage in reverse, frame by frame. There was no transition. It went from idle to a non-existent floor, then back again. But something was different now. On the floor of the cabin near the back was a pair of muddy boots. Old, covered in dust. One of the soles was separating at the heel. I went down to the 5th floor to check. The boots were still there, heavy, damp, and inside the left one was a name tag, half torn. Valdir, Engenharia. I searched the company records the next day. No one by that name had worked there since 2006. The janitor said the boots looked like the kind used during an electrical retrofit, probably someone who worked on the elevator shafts when the building was remodeled. He said it like it explained something. But no one could explain how they got there, or how the elevator had gone somewhere it wasn't supposed to. I didn't go up that night. I didn't patrol. I didn't check the floors. I didn't move from the control room. I kept all the monitors on, volume up, lights on, pen in hand. At 12:08 a.m., the elevator didn't open. At 12:13, it didn't go to 1. Nothing moved. I sat in that chair for another hour, waiting for something to happen. But the silence had changed. It didn't feel like calm anymore. It felt like anticipation. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I grabbed my bag and headed for the lobby. As I passed the elevators, I hesitated. The one on the left was slightly open, just a crack. I stood there staring at it, unable to walk away. The cabin was dark inside. I leaned in slightly and saw it. A new drawing. On the far wall, sketched in the same black charcoal as before, was the same door. Wooden, arched, but this time it was open. Not wide, just ajar. And something stood behind it. Not a person, not exactly. Just a shape. Broad shoulders, no face, no hands, just an outline in the dark. Below the drawing, in the same jagged writing, were 2 new words. Pronto. Pronto. Ek. Prato. Ek. Prato. Ready. Come in. I didn't move. Didn't touch anything. Didn't even breathe for a moment. Then the lights in the hallway flickered, and the elevator doors began to close. I stepped back, watching them slide shut. Just before they sealed completely, I saw one last thing, barely visible in the gap between the doors. The button for floor 1 was glowing. I resigned that morning. No explanation, no notice. But I still think about that last image, that door, that shape, and the feeling that the elevator wasn't just moving on its own anymore. It was waiting.